Most animals treat life like it's an emergency. Squirrels sprint across power lines like they're late for work. Antelopes run like they owe someone money. And hummingbirds flap their wings so fast, it looks like they're trying to vibrate into another dimension. Then there's the sloth. A creature that looked at the entire concept of urgency and said, "I'll get back to you in a few hours."
Oh my god, bro.
And somehow, against all common sense, that strategy has been working for millions of years. On paper, sloths should not exist. The animal is built like evolution lost a bet, and yet they're still here. That's the mystery. In a world where nature usually rewards speed, aggression, awareness, and at least a basic willingness to hustle, the sloth chose the exact opposite path. No speed, no urgency, no panic, no ambition. Just vibes and a suspicious level of confidence for an animal that looks like it's stuck on 2% battery. So the question isn't just why sloths are slow, the question is how being this slow didn't get them immediately deleted from the animal kingdom. Because if you dropped most animals into a tropical rainforest and told them, alright, your enemies include jaguars, harpy eagles, snakes, storms, and gravity, most of them would react by getting faster, stronger, meaner, or smarter. Sloths responded by becoming a warm houseplant.
Wow.
The first thing to understand is sloths are not lazy failures. They are not broken monkeys, they're not failed bears. They're a very specific solution to a very specific problem. But to appreciate that, you first have to understand just how absurdly slow they really are. A sloth on the ground moves at a speed that can best be described as regret. The three-toed sloth moves at an average of 0.15 miles per hour. That's closer to a slug than a human's walking speed. Their grip is so strong and their anatomy so specialized for hanging that even in death, a sloth can remain suspended from a branch, which is equal parts impressive and extremely unsettling. And yes, they sleep a lot. Sloths in the wild don't necessarily spend 20 hours a day unconscious like the memes suggest, but they do live at a reduced operating speed almost all the time. Even when awake, they move like they're trying not to disturb the air molecules around them. Then comes one of the weirdest details in the entire animal kingdom. About once a week, many sloths climb down from the safety of the trees to poop on the ground.
That is gross!
Which is an absolutely insane choice. Imagine living in a penthouse above a city full of murder, and once every 7 days deciding, you know what? Bathroom trip. Street level. That trip is one of the most dangerous things a sloth does. On the ground, they are exposed, awkward, and dramatically less capable. This is not a creature built around avoiding inconvenience. This is a creature built around minimizing effort so thoroughly that every major decision feels like it had to pass through 4 departments and a board meeting. And yet sloths are not some recent evolutionary joke, they are ancient. Their lineage goes back tens of millions of years. Sloths belong to a much larger group of mammals called xenarthrans, which also anticludes anteaters and armadillos, a lineup that feels like evolution was experimenting without adult supervision. Their ancestors survived enormous environmental changes, continental shifts, predator pressure, and the kind of ecological chaos that wipes out entire groups of animals. That matters because it means that slowness is not some accidental bug that natural selection forgot to patch. Natural selection had plenty of time to get rid of the sloth model if it wasn't working. The sloth is not slow because it failed to evolve properly. The sloth is slow because slowness is the strategy. But before that strategy makes sense, we need to deal with the obvious problem. How do you even power a mammal this way? Sloths somehow operate on an energy budget so tight that it makes your phone's low power mode look reckless. Every movement an animal makes is expensive. Running, climbing, digesting, thinking, breathing, maintaining body heat, every single one of those things burns calories. And the faster an animal moves, the faster it burns through its fuel supply. Most mammals deal with this problem by eating food that's loaded with energy. Meat, fruit, seeds, nuts, basically anything that comes with enough calories to justify the effort of being alive. Sloths actually eat leaves, and leaves, nutritionally speaking, are a terrible investment. Leaves are mostly fiber, which is difficult to digest. Plants also pack their leaves with defensive chemicals to discourage animals from eating them. Tannins, toxins, bitter compounds, basically the botanical equivalent of a do not touch sign written in poison. So if you're an animal trying to make a living off of leaves, you have two options.
Oh, really?
Option 1, eat a lot of them and digest them quickly. Option 2, eat a little and digest them extremely slowly. Sloths chose option 2. And when we say slowly, we mean ridiculously slowly. A typical mammal might digest a meal in hours. A cow or deer, which also rely on plant fermentation, might take a couple of days. A sloth can take weeks. In some cases, a single meal can take up to a month to fully pass through its digestive system. Their stomach works like a giant biological compost bin filled with microbes that slowly break down tough plant material. Those microbes extract whatever nutrients they can from the leaves, turning fiber into usable energy little by little.
Oh, that's disgusting.
They can't afford to burn energy quickly because their energy income arrives on the biological equivalent of a monthly payment plan. That's why sloths evolved the opposite strategy. They simply reduce their energy spending to the absolute minimum. In fact, their metabolism is estimated to be 40 to 50% slower than any other mammal of a similar size. Everything about them reflects this. Their muscles are smaller relative to the size of their body, their movements are deliberate and controlled, even their body temperature is unusually flexible for a mammal. While most mammals keep a very stable internal temperature, sloths allow theirs to fluctuate up to 10 degrees with the environment. That's much more common in reptiles than mammals. Basically, sloths are running a hybrid operating system, and the weirdness doesn't stop there. A sloth's stomach can actually hold over a third of its body weight in food.
Get in my belly!
Which explains another reason why they don't move quickly. Running around with a stomach full of fermenting leaves would be like trying to do parkour while carrying a backpack full of soup. But back to the key point, sloths didn't evolve this low-power lifestyle because they were lazy, they evolved it because their food forced them to. So sloths turn their entire physiology into an energy-saving machine, and once you commit to that strategy, speed stops making sense. But that still leaves a pretty big problem. For most animals, slow is basically an invitation to get eaten.
Oh, come on, man.
If sloths can't run, if they can't fight, and if they barely have enough energy to move quickly in the first place, how exactly are they not getting picked off immediately by every predator in the rainforest? The tropical rainforest is not a safe place. Normally, survival in this kind of environment depends on one of three strategies: run away, fight back, or hide really well. But instead of hiding the way that most animals do, through camouflage patterns or burrows, sloths discovered a much stranger loophole. They hide by barely moving. To understand how this works, you need to know something about how predators actually find their prey. Most predators aren't constantly scanning every detail of the forest, looking for perfectly camouflaged animals. That would be exhausting and inefficient. Instead, predator brains are tuned to notice movement. It instantly triggers attention. Movement is basically nature's notification system. This is why so many animals freeze when they sense danger. Deer do it, rabbits do it, even insects do it. The moment a predator might be nearby, the best move is often to stop moving entirely and hope you blend into the scenery. Sloths took that instinct and turned it into a full-time lifestyle. Instead of freezing occasionally, they move so slowly that their motion almost never triggers a predator's attention in the first place.
Must have been my imagination.
When a sloth climbs a branch, from a distance, the entire animal just looks like a clump of moss. And that illusion gets even stronger because of one of the strangest features in the animal kingdom: sloth fur. It becomes the perfect habitat for algae. Tiny green algae grow inside the grooves of the sloth fur, slowly spreading across the animal's coat. Over time, this gives the sloth a green tint, which means the animal doesn't just sit among the leaves, it starts to look like a part of them. The sloth is literally growing camouflage. But the weird ecosystem inside sloth fur doesn't even stop at algae, because where algae go, other creatures follow. Sloth fur is home to an entire community of insects, including a particularly strange resident, sloth moths.
Oh my god, what is that?
Yes, sloth moths. These moths spend most of their lives living in the sloth's fur, feeding on the algae and organic debris that collects there. When the sloth climbs down to the ground for its weekly bathroom trip, the moths leave the sloth, lay their eggs in the fresh dung, and eventually their larvae develop there. When the new moths hatch, they fly up into the canopy and find another sloth to live on. It's a life cycle that sounds like it was designed by a 2-year-old.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
But scientists think that this bizarre partnership might actually help the sloth. The moths add nutrients to the sloth's fur ecosystem, which encourages more algae growth. More algae means better camouflage. So in other words, the sloth isn't just hiding in the forest, it's slowly turning itself into a small, moving ecosystem that blends into the forest. Of course, sloths are not completely immune to danger. Harpy eagles are probably their most serious natural predator. These enormous birds are powerful enough to snatch monkeys straight out of trees, and they occasionally do the same to sloths. Jaguars can also catch them, especially when sloths are forced to climb down to the ground. But the key point is that predators don't encounter sloths nearly as often as you'd expect, because they're easy to overlook. Sloths live at a pace where the forest simply stops paying attention to them. They become background noise, part of the scenery, and in an ecosystem where attention can mean death, being forgettable is a superpower. But the thing is, the sloths that we see today are only one chapter in a much bigger evolutionary saga. Millions of years ago, sloths weren't quiet little camouflage experts hiding in the canopy. They were giants.
Oh my goodness!
If you walked through the forests of the Americas about 15,000 years ago, you might have encountered something that would completely change the way that you think about sloths. They were ground sloths, massive herbivores that walked across ancient landscapes like shaggy, clawed bulldozers. Some species stood over 6 meters tall, others weighed several tons, putting them in the same general weight class as elephants. Their arms were huge, their claws were enormous, and their bodies were built like tanks covered in fur. Ground sloths lived across North America, Central America, and South America, roaming forests, grasslands, and open woodlands. One of the most famous that you might have already heard of was the Megatherium, a species whose name literally means giant beast. They weren't predators, but they were absolutely not defenseless either. Those claws weren't just for pulling down branches. If threatened, a giant ground sloth could swipe with enough force to make even large predators reconsider their life choices. In fact, paleontologists think adult ground sloths probably didn't have many natural predators at all. When you weigh several tons and carry claws the size of kitchen knives, most hunters decide to look for something easier. So for millions of years, sloths thrived. They diversified into dozens of species, some climbing trees, some stayed on the ground, some were giants and some were medium-sized. The sloth family tree was wide and successful, spreading across an entire hemisphere. Around 10 to 12,000 years ago, the world went through a massive wave of extinctions. Across the planet, many of the large animals that had dominated ecosystems for hundreds of thousands of years suddenly disappeared. Mammoths vanished, saber-toothed cats vanished, giant ground sloths vanished. Entire communities of megafauna, the giant animals of the Ice Age, collapsed in a surprisingly short window of time. Temperatures shifted, habitats changed, and ecosystems reorganized. At the same time, humans were spreading across the Americas, and humans, historically speaking, are very good at causing extinction.
I'm sorry. I'm out of control. I apologize for that.
Even relatively small human populations can push megafauna into decline over time. For giant ground sloths, the combination of environmental change and human expansion appears to have been catastrophic. But not every sloth lineage vanished. A few species had already moved into a different lifestyle, and suddenly that quiet, slow, tree-dwelling strategy looked a lot smarter. Because humans are very good at spotting large animals walking across open ground, we are much worse at noticing a clump of moss hanging 30 feet above our heads. So while the giants disappeared, the smaller tree sloths survived. In a strange way, the modern sloth is what happens when an entire evolutionary dynasty collapses and only the stealth specialists remain. They are the quiet survivors of a once gigantic family, the descendants of animals that once looked mammoths in the eye. It's a dramatic transformation. But that shift also reveals something important about evolution. Success isn't permanent. The traits that dominate one era can become disadvantages in the next. Being absolutely jacked worked for sloths for millions of years, until the world changed. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, because if you step back and look at the entire story, you start to realize something surprising. Sloths hacked evolution in a way that nothing else did. Over millions of years, natural selection kept refining that system until sloths became the ultimate specialists in low-energy survival. Instead of fighting the intensity of the rainforest, they stepped out of the race entirely, barely participating in the chaos around them. And that strategy has worked surprisingly well. Of course, the modern world has introduced challenges that evolution didn't necessarily prepare them for. Habitat loss, deforestation, and expanding human infrastructure have created dangers that camouflage and patience can't always solve. Roads, power lines, and shrinking forests are much harder to hide from than jaguars or eagles. But even with those challenges, the sloth's evolutionary strategy remains one of the most unusual success stories in the animal kingdom. Being the fastest animal in the forest requires a constant supply of energy. Being the strongest animal requires enormous amounts of food. But being the most efficient animal, it requires patience, and it requires restraint. And occasionally, it requires the confidence to hang upside down in a tree while the entire rest of the forest runs around like the world is ending. You don't always have to outrun the chaos of nature. Sometimes you can survive simply by slowing down enough that the chaos runs right past you.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
In the right environment, doing less isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's the smartest strategy on Earth.